Roaring Nigeria Securities Markets. Inside top 25 foreign debt and equity bulls and whales. Funds salivating on stocks, bonds, and derivatives capital raising and trading tools. Nigeria is currently on the treetops of the euphoria gripping portfolio asset managers and institutional investors in not global financial markets of opportunities for superior risk, adjusted returns in the global frontier, and emerging markets segment. The roaring Nigeria Securities Markets is the toast and rave of the moment, consistently delivering mouth-watering yields above the MSCI, Emerging and Frontier Markets Index benchmarks. The attribution is to rare, disciplined, tight monetary policy that have enhanced favorable exploitation of arbitrage carry trade and mispricing inflows in the global financial markets advantaged Nigeria financial assets. The turnaround impact of portfolio managers and investors' sentiments, narratives, and behaviors have been astounding. According to recent Central Bank of Nigeria data, foreign portfolio investments more than soared by 106.5% to $13.5 billion, recording a net acquisition of $12.12 billion in financial assets in 2024. Consequently, Nigeria external foreign exchange reserves increased by $6.0 billion to $40.19 billion by year-end of 2024. This is unveiling the drivers behind the soaring foreign portfolio investments wheels. Inside top 25 foreign debt and equity bulls and whales funds salivating on stocks, bonds, and derivatives capital raising and trading tools. JP Morgan Emerging Markets Funds. JP Morgan Emerging Markets Funds are accessed in three main emerging markets fund. JP Morgan funds to provide capital growth by investing primarily in emerging companies. JP Morgan Emerging Markets Opportunities Fund Markets Equity Fund to provide capital growth over the long term, 5 to 10 years, by investing at least 80% of the funds in equity. Securities of emerging markets companies is at least 80% of assets invested in equities of companies that are domiciled or carrying out the main part of their activity in an emerging country. JP Morgan Global Bond Fund to achieve a return in excess of its benchmark by exploiting opportunities in, amongst others, the debt and currency markets, using derivatives where appropriate. George Gotch is head of JP Morgan Assets Management, aabove Markets and Frontier Markets Funds. Aberdeen Standard SICAV on the Emerging Markets Fund aims to achieve emergence, growth, and income, and designed for exposure to companies in emerging markets countries. Aberdeen SICAV on the Frontier Markets Bond Fund's investment objective is to achieve long-term total return by investing at least 2/3 of the fund's assets in debt and debt-related securities, AFN issued by governments or government-related bodies domiciled in a frontier funds country. The current geographical funds allocation are China, Taiwan, India, Korea, Mexico, Indonesia, Hong Kong. Jason Windsor is the Chief Executive Officer of Aberdeen Group, Alan Gray, Africa, and Frontier Funds. Alan Gray Africa Equity Fund invests in focused portfolio of countries with significant interests in Africa. The fund's top 5 countries of primary listing are Nigeria, South Africa, Egypt, Zimbabwe, and United Kingdom. Alan Gray Frontier Markets Equity Fund invests in a focused portfolio of frontier market equities. The fund aims to outperform frontier markets over the long term without greater risk of loss. The top 5 countries of the fund's listing are United Kingdom, Philippines, Kazakhstan, Nigeria, and Egypt. Duncan Artis is the Chief Executive Officer of Alan Gray. Aristea SICAV New Frontiers Equity Fund. The fund aims to provide capital through investing directly or indirectly in equity and equity-related securities of companies domiciled in frontier markets, or that exercise a significant part of their economic activity there. The country exposures are in France, Italy, and Belgium. Andrea Federici is the Chief Executive of Kalido Partners. Ashmore Emerging Markets Frontier Equity Fund. The Ashmore Emerging Markets Frontier Equity Fund seeks to achieve its objective by investing in equity and quasi-equity related investments of frontier markets issuers. The fund seeks long-term capital appreciation. The top 5 countries' exposures are Venezuela, Mexico, Indonesia, Turkey, and Guatemala. Mark Coombs is the Chief Executive Officer of Ashmore Group. Coeli SICAV Frontier Markets Fixed Income Fund. Coeli SICAV aims to achieve a competitive return investing in frontier markets debt. The fund's objective is to create a good pop returns by investing in a diversified selection of fixed income securities within frontier markets. The fund's country allocation are Angola, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Cayman Islands, Costa Rica, Egypt, El Salvador, Gabon, Ghana, Great Britain, and Guatemala. Martin Vogel is CEO of Cochager EO at MDO Management, manager of Coeli Fund. Coronation Africa Frontier Strategy. The Coronation Africa Frontier Strategy aims to maximize the long-term risk-adjusted returns available from investments on the African continent through capital growth of the underlying stocks selected. It is a flexible portfolio, primarily invested African equities or stocks listed on developed emerging markets exchanges, where a substantial part of their earnings are derived from the African continent. The top 5 current geographic exposure are Egypt, Nigeria, Morocco, Kenya, and Zimbabwe. Anton Pillay is CEO of Coronation Asset Management. 8. Danske Invest SICAV Emerging Markets Sustainable Future Fund. The objective of Danske Invest SICAV Emerging Markets Sustainable Fund is to achieve above-market performance. The fund invests mainly in emerging market equities. The fund focuses on companies with economic activities aligned with UN Sustainable Development Goals, such as activities relating to renewable energy, financial inclusion, healthcare, and innovation. Robert Mikkelstrup, CEO, Danske Invest. 9. Eaton Vance Emerging and Frontier Countries Equity Fund. Eaton Vance Emerging and Frontier Markets Fund seeks total return with income and capital appreciation. The fund seeks its investment objective by investing at least 80% of its new assets, plus the amount of any borrowings for investment purposes, in equity investments in emerging and frontier markets countries represented in the MSCI Emerging Markets Index. The top 5 country exposure are China, Vietnam, Taiwan, India, Korea, and Chile. The African countries exposure are Nigeria and Egypt. Sahil Tandon is the MD, Eaton Vance. 10. Horizon Fund Equity Emerging Markets New Frontiers Fund. Horizon Fund Equity Emerging Markets New Frontiers Fund seeks to increase the value of investment over time and to outperform frontier equity markets as measured by the benchmark. The fund mainly invests in frontier markets equities. The country fund exposure are Morocco, Vietnam, Luxembourg, and Qatar. Max Komatsu is the CEO of Horizon Fund. 11. Evli Emerging Frontier Fund. Evli Emerging Frontier Fund is an equity fund that invests its assets in the equity and equity-linked securities of companies operating in the emerging market and in the frontier markets of the emerging economies. The fund's geographical investment coverage consists of emerging economies or attribution, markets in Asia, Africa, Central Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America. The fund's strategy is to target markets that are generally less known and accessible for investors, while their economic growth is forecast to outperform that of the developed economies, offering investors good diversification and opportunity for superior return. Pasala Kim is the Evli Fund Chief Executive Officer. 12. Fisher Investment FI Institutional Emerging Markets Equity Fund. FI Institutional Emerging Markets Equity Fund's objective is to outperform the MSCI Emerging Markets Index, the benchmark, by investing in emerging market securities. For the period October 1, 2023 to March 31, 2024, the fund outperformed the MSCI Emerging Markets Index country and sector allocation, as well as equity selection contributed to relative return. The top 5 country exposure are Argentina, China, Hong Kong, Indonesia, and Mexico. Ken Fisher is the CEO at Fisher Investment. 13. Harding Loevner Frontier Emerging Markets Funds. Harding Loevner Frontier Emerging Markets Fund seeks long-term capital appreciation. The fund invests primarily in companies that are based in frontier emerging markets, including the smaller, traditionally recognized emerging markets. The fund invests at least 80% of its assets in frontier emerging securities and investment companies that invest in the types of securities in which the portfolio would normally invest. The fund's regional geographic listed exposure are the Gulf states, Asia, Middle East, Latin America, Africa, Europe. Aaron Bellish is the chief executive of Harding Loevner. 14 HSBC Global Investment Funds, Frontier Markets Fund, HSBC Global Investment Frontier. Frontier Markets Fund invests for long-term total returns, primarily in a diversified portfolio of frontier market equities. The fund invests in normal market conditions a minimum of its assets in equity and equity-equivalent securities of companies which have their registered office in, and with an official listing on a major exchange or other regulated market in frontier markets, as well as those companies with significant operations or carrying out a preponderance part of their business activities in these countries. Nicoles Moreau is the CEO at HSBC Global Asset Management. 15. Oaks Emerging and Frontier Opportunities Fund. Oaks Emerging and Frontier Opportunities Fund's objective is to seek to maximize total return by investing in diversified portfolio of global frontier securities and global emerging securities. The fund's strategy is fundamental, bottom-up and equity-linked that seeks to maximize total return by investing in global frontier and emerging securities through a portfolio of single-stock long and short positions with a low correlation to underlying markets. The top 5 country exposure are Argentina, Bahrain, Georgia, and Kenya. Maxine Menard is the MD, Fiera Capital, manager of OAK Fund 16. Silk Invest New Horizons Frontier Fund. Silk Invest New Horizons Frontier Fund will invest at least 80% of its net assets in issuers located in frontier markets, or whose primary operations or principal trading markets are in frontier markets in depositary receipts, including American depositary receipts. The fund will predominantly invest in equity securities and may invest in companies of any market capitalization. The schedule of investment in African economies are Egypt, Kenya, Morocco, and Nigeria. Zin Bakali is CEO of Silk Invest 17. Schroeder International Selection Fund, Frontier Market Equity Fund, Schroeder International Selection Fund. Frontier Markets Fund aims to provide capital growth in excess of the MSCI Frontier Emerging Markets, FEM, Index, net TR, with emerging markets capped at 10% after fees have been deducted over a 3 to 5 year period by investing in equity-related securities of frontier emerging markets companies. The geographical allocation of African economies are in Morocco, Egypt, and Kenya. Ronnie Sidani is head of frontier investments at Schroeder. 18. T. Rowe Price Funds, SICAV Frontier Markets. Equity Fund, T. Rowe Price Funds, SICAV Frontier Markets. Equity Fund's objective is to increase the value of its shares over the long term through growth in value of its investments. The fund has potential for long-term returns and alpha through gain and exposure to inefficient regions, which offer rare structural growth opportunities. The top 5 countries active position are Vietnam, Nigeria, Kazakhstan, Romania, and Slovenia. Richard Oldfield, Group CEO of T. Rowe Price 19. TCM Investment Fund. TCM Investment Fund invests in listed companies from the frontier markets universe, such as but not listed to Argentina, Bangladesh, Croatia, Kenya, Kazakhstan, Kuwait, Sri Lanka, Mauritius, Nigeria, Pakistan, Romania, Oman, Ukraine, Egypt, and Vietnam, which are markets at an early stage of economic development, with an attractive yield. The fund aims to generate a long-term return in excess of the benchmark, comprising capital gains or losses plus net dividend. Witsa Riemersma, CEO of Trustus, manager of TCM Fund 20. Tundra Sustainable Frontier Funds. Tundra Sustainable Frontier Fund is a global equity fund with a particular emphasis on investments in emerging markets and so-called frontier markets. The fund management company's management of the fund is intended to generate financial exposure to economic development in emerging markets and to generate a higher return than MSCI FM GCC net total return at an equal or lower risk level. The fund country portfolio are in Botswana, Bangladesh, Egypt, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, Morocco, Nigeria, Philippines, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, Turkey. Matthias Martinson, CIO at Tundra 21. Wasatch Frontier, Emerging Small Countries. Fund Investor, Class Shares. Wasatch Frontier. Emerging Small Countries Fund Investor. Class Shares seeks long-term growth of capital. The fund invests primarily in the equity securities of all market capitalization that are tied economically to frontier markets in small countries. Scott Thomas, Portfolio Manager at Wasatch 22. UI Actia EM Frontier Bond Plus Fund. UI Actia EM Frontier Bond Plus Fund seeks to achieve the best possible risk-adjusted return by investing in at least 51% of the net asset value in bond and currency exposure with risks from emerging and frontier markets. The investment has a long-term investment horizon. Top 5 African economies country exposure are Uganda, Egypt, Kenya, Nigeria, Tanzania, and Algeria. Alexei Lentonen, CEO at Actia 23. American Beacon Developing World Income Fund. American Beacon Developing World Income Fund seeks income with capital appreciation as a secondary objective. The fund normally invests 80% of its net assets, plus the amount of any borrowings for investment purposes, in investments that are economically tied to developing countries. Paul Cavazos, CIO as American Beacon 24. Global Evolution Fund's Frontier Markets. Global Evolution Fund Frontier Market investment objective is to achieve capital growth. The fund will invest at least 70% in transferable debt securities and money markets instruments issued by sovereigns, supranationals, or multilaterals from frontier markets, and financial derivative, credit-linked notes, and loan participation notes that provide exposure to frontier markets. Martin Buggy, CIO at Global Evolution 25. Edmund de Rothschild, Strategic Emerging Fund. Edmund de Rothschild's Strategic Emerging Fund's investment objective over a recommended investment period of more than 5 years is to grow net asset value by investing in predominantly in emerging countries Asia, Latin America, Caribbean, Eastern Europe, Middle East, Africa. The fund is actively managed. Environmental, social, and governance (ESG) criteria are one of the elements on which management focuses. Serge Wayland is CEO at Edmund de Rothschild. For the best in foreign capital solutions, please contact Mr. Inatin Sanusi, Executive Chairman at ACV SPAC Multimedia Limited Tel. 234-8088-45-9605. Email inatin.sanusi@acvrespec.com.
you